All right. After that fancy pants intro, that's the second time I've seen that, Blake. And yeah, pretty nice welcome. Good to have you on Ion Live. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to
Yeah,
be here.
this format's interesting for me because it's very conversational, and that's all I want to do today is pick your brain on some fishing stuff, BS like we do on the phone, and talk fishing spots, talk fishing techniques, patterns, stuff that you've been up to, and have folks kind of get a feel for you along the way. And for those of you guys joining us, we've got the comment section opened. I'll first provide a little bit of an intro to Blake. So my first time fishing with Blake was actually on part of the St. Croix Rods fishing team. So when was that? Was that 2019, 2020? It was probably COVID, wasn't it?
It was, I think it was, that was 2020. Yep.
2020, yeah.
Fall of 2020.
I'd known of Blake. We'd chatted online, ran into each other at shows, that kind of thing from different teams, but actually had a chance to fish with Blake. And we were up on Winnie off of Cutfoot Sioux looking for panfish. It's great panfish fishery.
Sure is.
And I think Blake caught a bigger crappie than me, which hurt my feelings. I didn't like that. And then I started catching nice bluegills, and we had a great time. Were we in separate boats? How was that? Do you remember?
So, well, the first day we fished together. I do remember that.
Yeah.
Yep, because we went back in ways into Cutfoot, and that's where we finally found some fish.
Right. Yeah, and then we ended up spending some time on Big Winnie too, if I remember.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, yep. I remember that day very well because I saw the biggest school of walleyes I've ever seen in my life on side imaging. It was like a 4-mile long school of fish.
Yeah, basically that entire area, just as all walleyes.
So it was like a 1/4 mile wide too. That was the crazy part. Like you couldn't get away from the walleyes. And so I had this fancy pants idea that I'd troll like plugs through it, like shad wraps or whatever, something to that effect through those fish, and maybe pull out some larger ones because we had people around us that were catching small fish on jig and minnow. But I thought maybe I could get some bigger walleyes to go, and we proceeded to catch pike after pike after pike, which was about what I get for getting too crazy.
Sometimes you just got to go with the jig and a minnow. You just got to, deal with the hand that you're dealt. That's all you can do.
Don't fight it. But here we are on ice during ice season. And so that was my intro to Blake. Always knew you were a talented panfish angler. Man for my own heart, I love pan fishing, obviously. And I know you do a lot of it now in Wisconsin, but you're from Minnesota, aren't you?
That's correct. Yep. I grew up just south of Duluth, Moose Lake, same area as Tony.
Okay.
Yep. So I fished a lot of the stuff in northern Minnesota for, I don't know, the first 20 years of my life. I really, when I lived there, I was a walleye guy. That's what I did mostly. The panfish stuff, like, ride my bike down to the local lake every day, fish for bluegills and crappies. But when I went fishing with my dad, we were fishing for walleyes.
That makes sense. Yeah. And then since then you've crisscrossed the border several times. You live in Wisconsin now, and you spend a ton of time fishing there, but you still come back and forth quite a bit. So you check out a lot of the Midwest.
Oh, for sure. Yep. Lived in Wisconsin for just over 10 years now, which is hard to believe. But yep, I still fish in Minnesota a lot. I mean, take my annual trip to Winnie with my dad every year for the opener, and then a number of trips throughout the year.
So tell me the difference now that you kind of had the pleasure of fishing both places. I doubt one is better than the other. They're probably just different, right? So give me your take on Minnesota versus Wisconsin for the areas you've fished.
Well, I mean, really the key difference I feel like is it kind of relates to what the state fishes. I mean, it's Minnesota, it's all about walleyes. Like, we fish panfish, people fish for bass and muskies, but in general, like the theme is walleyes. Here, it's about muskies. Like muskies, the state fish in Wisconsin, and like the DNR does a lot to manage for muskies. And there's a lot of people I know that fish for muskies. That's like the biggest obvious difference, I would say.
I always thought in certain portions of Minnesota, you could go and you still had to hunt for muskie lakes. Whereas I always felt like I lived in Wisconsin for a little while. I went to school in Ashland, and it was like, well, most lakes would have muskies in the populated areas rather than here one or two. It's like most of them, right?
You feel like you're hunting more for the walleye lakes over here than you are for the muskie lakes. Yep.
Right. So knowing that you're kind of a panfish guy, but you fish multi-species like the rest of us, I know we spent some time fishing on the river not too long ago as well. And I know you do a lot with smallmouth. You caught a
Yep.
pretty big muskie that time. And it's wild.
That's still my biggest muskie. Yeah, that was a very unique day. I mean, the goal was smallmouth, and they
Yeah.
kicked our butt. We got just some small ones, but
Right.
what do we have? I think I landed 3 muskies, and we had, I don't know, 5 or 6 bite us off beyond that.
Right. It was nuts.
Yeah.
It was a chatterbait, so we were throwing some bass style baits at the confluence of a river mouth, and I think I got bit off with a jig first, and I remember your words were prophetic. I'm like, shoot, I got piked, and you're like, there's not a lot of pike in this stretch. It could have been a muskie, and I'm like, maybe, and
yeah.
I don't think it was 15 minutes later, and we were having this knockdown, drag out slugfest with a muskie.
Yeah, that's still like it's one of my favorite fishing memories. Like, chuck a chatterbait up into this creek arm, and I'm like, man, I'm snagged. And then all of a sudden that snag starts moving.
That was crazy because I remember trying to fit that fish in what half-ass walleye net we had, and I just thought this is never, ever gonna work.
Oh, that's I think you deserve a medal for your netting skills on that day, because that was
I could have much more. I could have very easily broke your net, had the fish slip through the net. Could have been the goat pretty simple on that one too.
There was some luck involved in landing that fish.
I don't mean greatest of all time goat either. I mean like the real a Billy goat on that. So, so tell me this. Have you been ice fishing yet? It's the question of the day. And don't feel bad if you haven't, because I have not.
Well, I'm with you. I haven't yet. It's not that I couldn't have. I've been focused on other activities, outdoor activities, trying to shoot a deer. That was kind of my priority for a while. I figured we're going to have 3 to 4 months of ice ahead of us. Fingers crossed, of course. So I should try to focus on the deer a little bit before I move.
And let's be honest. When we're in the fishing industry, this time of year, it's tough to get out on first ice because, man, I was at the St. Paul Ice Show just like you were, right?
Yep.
We spend 3 full days there. Your weekdays then are a lot more compressed. And I've got an in-store event at Cabela's Rogers coming up. I'm guessing you have other obligations as well. So it's a tough time to get out there, isn't it?
It is. And thankfully the season's long. Like, I try not to worry about it too much. We're going to have plenty of time to fish.
I agree. Yeah. And it gives us an extra chance to make sure the ice is safe and in good condition. And I was actually talking to Nick Linder about this on the last show. It was maybe 2 weeks ago. And he and I have had some shaky first ice experiences with bluegills and crappies. Bluegills especially just kind of being tight-lipped that first, like when you get 3 inches of crystal clear, hard, beautiful ice, and you're so excited to get out there, and the fish can be rough. And so I'm wondering if you've experienced the same thing. Like
100%.
You see that in Wisconsin too?
All the time. Yep. Especially the shallow bodies of water. Like you said, you get that clear ice. There's no snow. Like it sometimes it feels impossible to catch a fish. Like, if you have like forward facing sonar or something, you can see them. They're off there, but you try to get anywhere near them, they're gone.
It's ridiculous. I have struggled mightily at times, and then we get a little bit of snow. Maybe you get closer to 6-8 inches of ice. It's 4-wheelerable, snowmobilable, or whatever, how you would say it. And now all of a sudden those fish are a heck of a lot more cooperative. I see it all the time.
Last year with that rough ice season we had, I don't know if we had more than 6 inches a lot of places here, and no snow. So it was like that all year where you were struggling to stay on top of fish. Like they were there, and there was days where you would rip on them, but there was a lot of days where they were just extra skittish because there's no snow on the ice. Like every little thing is scaring them off.
My best bite last winter I had 2 decent bites for gills. One was shallower water, but it was stained. God, it was dark stuff. And the other one was this weird bluegill pattern where they were suspended in like 30 feet of water, but they were like 15 to 18 feet down. And I don't see that with gills very often. It's kind of a weird one that's more of a crappie play, but that bite was solid. Like they were down far enough and you could get over the top of them and they didn't really seem to spook much, right?
For sure.
Yeah, kind of an interesting. James Bystrom, thanks for tuning in. it's sad that Wisconsin isn't more active in walleye stocking. Now, I bet you that's by area. Do they stock much for walleyes in your neck of the woods, Blake?
They do. I mean, I live right by Lake Wissota, and it's known to have a lot of walleyes, but not to have a lot of big walleyes.
Sure.
So there are areas, but I mean, there's some pretty good walleye fisheries, especially as you get up towards northern Wisconsin, the Hayward area, that Vilas County. There's some pretty outstanding walleye fisheries in Wisconsin. Obviously, the eastern half of the state, you have Green Bay, Winnebago, but like kind of that western northern piece, you got to go up a little bit outside of the Eau Claire area to get to some of the better stuff.
Yeah, do we think that it's stocking related a lot of times, or is it just that the lakes don't support walleye natural reproduction? What are your thoughts on that topic? Because you probably are closer, you got a closer finger to the pulse of that than I do.
Yeah, it really depends on the lake. Like we have a lot of, great panfish lakes. They're not really suited for good walleye populations.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, I wouldn't expect there to be, go out there and catch a bunch of walleyes. They do a fair amount of stocking, but
yeah,
that only goes so far. If the lake can't support the fish, it's not going to do you any good.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny because if you compare it to Iowa, like James, to your point about stocking, in Iowa, it's all put and take. I mean, they dump adult brood stock in these lakes for you basically to go and in that same year catch it and take it home and clean it. And so it's interesting. I have not seen that outside of Iowa, mostly because Iowa has, only enough lakes you can count them on your two hands, basically.
Right.
So
yeah.
A little easier to stock them full, but they stock them multiple times annually, and anglers down there love it, right?
Well, I'm sure they do. Gives them a new opportunity for down there. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So we are on Ion Live. So I was going to ask you a couple questions regarding the Alpha. Did you use it that first year? Were you with Ion then?
Yes.
Or even back before then?
I was back before then. So I jumped on the team when the G2 came out.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah.
That G2, that thing really ripped. And when it came out, like, that was what kind of turned my eye to Ion 2, because I was like, I had been with a different auger company and was very happy for many years, been there for 20 years. And that G2 came out and it had the poly flighting, which was kind of a new concept at the time. Like, people were worried about that, right? Like, poly flighting, can we even run that way? But then, like, I even see them now, like, they're blowing out a couple closeouts G2 still these days, and there's nothing wrong with that auger at all.
There's nothing wrong. I had the G2. I used it for a couple of years, and I loved it. There was nothing wrong with it. Like, if they didn't make something better, I would still be using that because I agree. I was a great auger. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. My kids like that auger too. I don't know if it's the handle design, but they had a very easy time drilling with it. And I think that was my experience coming over to Ion, to like very smooth auger to drill with. Maybe tell me a little bit about the Alpha and your first thoughts about it when you had a chance to put it in your hands.
I mean, you already said it, smooth. Like, that was the biggest thing. Like, I have used every major auger on the market. I had no obligations for a very long time. So I tried everybody's. I owned several different ones. And that was like the biggest thing compared to every other auger I used, was how smooth it was. I drill a lot of holes, and it drove me nuts when you'd get to the bottom of the ice and you'd have that feeling where it would just crank. And it just, like, one of these times I'm breaking a wrist. But that was like the biggest thing for me, was the smoothness.
I actually know somebody that did break a wrist. And she was drilling, and she's tough as hell. Like, she kills big bucks, and like, she's very good as an outdoors person, as an angler. And she was drilling and just not paying attention right at that breakthrough moment, and it literally snapped in a funny direction, and broke her wrist. So that kind of blew me away. And with that Alpha, that breakthrough moment, it's like you just don't even realize you've already plunged through and cut the hole.
I remember the first time I drilled with the G2 and the Alpha, and you're waiting, like, you're anticipating that breakthrough, and you're just like, oh, well, okay, I'm already through. And then it's just great.
Tell me this, are you a pistol bit fan? Do you run drill adaptables too, like early season or panfish? What do you prefer, and when and why?
So I like the pistol bit. I do use that, especially for early ice. It's great to pack light.
Yeah.
The other time that I do use it is when I'm like on a super like quick basin bite, like where they're roaming hard,
Yeah.
because I can drill with one hand and then be able to carry my flasher and rods in the other hand. So outside of that, though, I'm using the Alpha almost exclusively.
Nice.
Yep.
James Bystrom commented, just bought the Alpha. It's going to get its first run this weekend. James, go to the thickest ice you can find and really put it through its paces. I don't know if we have enough ice yet to, I mean, it's going to be awesome, but like, man, that thing, once you get more than a foot of ice, that thing really then you really understand how much that thing sings, but you're going to love it. I know you will.
There's no doubt about it.
The thing that doesn't get talked about a lot with that auger is that variable speed trigger.
Mm-hmm.
I use it in my fish house quite a bit because not only when I want to start the hole, I want it to be perfectly centered in that hole sleeve cover inside my Yeti, but I don't want to throw chips everywhere. So like I actually auger pretty slow with that thing and just let it kind of slow churn and not like throw chips all over the house. And you start to find all kinds of reasons why that's just a better mousetrap, right?
Oh, it is. It's a big deal. It's like, for me, I don't have a wheelhouse, but some of these bites you want to fish the same holes. So like redrilling those old holes, having that variable speed is super slick for that too. Like,
great point. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. And you're right. Yeah, some of these places like Cribbville in Wisconsin, you got a lot of cribs there, right?
We do, yeah. Or like the trout bites they get on, sometimes like it's a spot on the spot thing. Like if I move 5 feet that way, I'm catching 0 trout. If I move here, I'm catching several trout.
Tell me about trout fishing. I know you do a fair amount of it over there. The fish are gorgeous. Like they are beautiful fish. The only experience I have with trout bites is they're kind of finicky sometimes, like surprisingly finicky. Is it that way on the lakes you're fishing?
They can't. There's days where it's lights out, and there's days where they are super picky. You're seeing them coming over and over again. You can watch them on camera, watch them on your flasher, and they just don't want to eat.
Yeah.
Here it's kind of like you talk about the put and take fisheries in Iowa. All of our trout lakes are that.
Sure.
And when we're talking trout, we're talking brookies, browns, rainbows. We don't have much for a laker. In my part of the state, there's 0 lakers. You got to travel a ways to get to those.
Tell me about trout for eating. Are you ever eating any of those fish that come out of those lakes?
Occasionally. I have a very good friend who likes to eat them a lot. So if I keep some, usually they go there. But for me, it's a put and take fishery, but I like catching fish. So if I put them back, I can catch them again, hopefully.
I like that. Do you smoke them? Or does your buddy grill them? How does he prepare them?
Well, when I do it, I grill them. I do it just like a piece of salmon. So very simple, little olive oil, little seasoning, right on a piece of tinfoil. That's good. I know he does it that way. He's kind of one of these chef types, so he likes to take things to a whole other level, something beyond what I do.
Well, as long as he shares, I'm just fine with it, right?
Yeah, I'm fine with it too. Yep.
Very cool. All right. So trout through the ice is something that you do. What do you use for baits? Is it just tiny kind of mini walleye baits? What are you throwing? What are you dropping?
It's mostly panfish stuff. So a lot of like hair jigs, jigging plastics. My favorite bait though is it's a Eurotackle Z Viber. It's the 116. So it's a really small lipless crankbait.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of lipless because it has a single hook on the back.
Yeah.
So I'll thread a few maggots or a few wax worms on there. And then once they get that single hook, it's like, a single hook just really helps pin fish. So that's why I like that. And with trout, the head shakes and they're running and you're in shallow water. So it's nice to know that once you hook a fish, it's likely not coming unbuttoned.
Yeah, you bet. Jim Collins in the comment corner said something about considering a battery renewal exchange program. That's not something I guess I would have ever considered or thought about, but I bet with the older ions, as battery technology has gotten better, I tend not to go through many batteries. Have you had any batteries go bad on you or had any battery experiences you've needed a replacement on, Blake?
I haven't yet. I have 2 batteries, and so they kind of just get, it's very rare you go through 2 batteries in a day.
Oh, that's a lot of drilling. That's a lot.
I think I've done it 2 times, and that's like those days where you're a lot of ice, you're chasing kind of thing. But no, usually I'm just recycling those batteries. So I'll use one, and then the next time I use the other one just to kind of balance it out, I guess.
Right. Yeah. And as a reminder, please drop some questions, different topics you want to talk about in the comments section. It looks like James Bystrom mentioned he's going to hit the ice this weekend. If you were going to hit the ice this weekend, Blake, what would you chase and what would you be looking for? What would you go after and how would you key in on those fish?
So for me, it'd probably be panfish.
Yep.
Around here, it would probably have to be a shallower body of water right now.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, our deep stuff like I said, I live right by Lake Wissota. That just locked up. The big lake locked up last night. So finally died down enough that things could lock up. So I'd be focused on the shallower body of water, probably something pretty small, 200 to 300 acres.
Yep.
A lot of those, they do have these kind of like micro basins. One thing I've noticed here in a lot of these smaller lakes that we have, we don't get that really strong weed bite throughout the winter months. I don't know if you see that down by you at all, Joel, but like these smaller kind of muckier lakes, like as soon as fall hits, all those fish are in the basin, whether it's a 15-foot basin or a 40-foot basin.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because I've got a lot of variable water where I live. Yep. I've got the deeper stuff. I've got reservoirs nearby. I also have, like you guys have flowages everywhere out there.
Oh, yeah.
I also have some very fertile, shallow, somewhat featureless lakes where literally it's more about spreading out. It's like Upper Red Lake where you're trying to just get away from people because everything looks the same.
Yeah.
And if you're off on your own, you've just got a better chance of running into fish because all they're doing is they're chasing pelagic schools of bait, not really relating to a whole heck of a lot. So
yeah, we have those too. Like Shiitake is a good example. Parts of the Shiitake chain are just like that.
It's frustrating, but also fun because when you do get on fish in those situations, as long as you're quiet and you're not ripping around with holes, and as long as you have enough holes drilled in the area, you can stay on them pretty darn well because they don't have a lot of other places to flee to. You know what I mean?
No, that's exactly it. Yep.
They're just kind of out in the open, roaming around a little bit. But okay, so tell me, you mentioned panfish. Which is your favorite panfish species to chase after?
For sure, crappies for me. I like everything, but crappies, they got a special place in my heart. I just really like them.
You have good photography skills, and the first time I noticed that is with crappies. Like you take a lot of cool pictures of crappies.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about photography and you and fishing. Did you just get into that because there was a need as a pro staff team member, or has it always been a passion of yours? What's the photography angle for you?
Yeah, so it kind of just happened on accident. I mean, I always took a lot of pictures with my phone for years. I enjoyed doing that. And then I got to the point where I wanted to see kind of that next step. So I bought, my first entry-level camera, and I had that for several years. And then within the last couple of years, I purchased a high-end one. For me, it's something I'm really passionate about. It wasn't something I started early in life. It's probably been 6-7 years that I've been taking a lot of photos, but I enjoy it. Like I enjoy that, taking the pictures and kind of seeing that, not as much as the fishing, but it's a close second for me. I really enjoy the photography side.
I appreciate having somebody that's great with photography along because I'm typically the group photographer in the parties that I fish with, meaning if I catch a good fish, I can clearly count on my kids to hold my cell phone in a messed up way, cut off my head, take a beautiful fish and make it look small somehow. Terrible look on my face, just bad things overall. And then they laugh about it. So that's what I've come to expect. So it's wonderful being along with somebody like yourself that can take a really good photo.
It's nice. Yeah, I understand that sentiment too, because I've had this conversation with many people, how you're just jacked to see what that photo looks like.
Yes.
Like, well, never mind. I'll try again next year.
I wish not. I'm highlighting this comment because I'm pretty sure the best part about D-Tro, you don't know Darren Trosa. He's an industry staple. He's been around as long as all of us have been and then some. And he's a phenomenal angler. He's a state record holder when it comes to sturgeon. But he's really good at making comments like this one. If you want to get away from the crowds and catch some nice trout, Courthouse in Chaska, Minnesota is a sleeper. So I'm pretty sure this is him being as facetious as he gets. This one is not a sleeper. I don't believe, Blake, is it?
No, I don't think so. No, I never fished it, but I'm very familiar with it. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
But speaking of new places to fish and finding new places to fish, you and I both do some stuff with Onyx Fish.
Yes,
It's a
sir.
full-time gig for me. I am curious because I haven't talked to you a little bit about this specifically, but it just came out for Wisconsin. For everybody that's tuned in, how are your experiences with it in Wisconsin so far? Just give me a rundown about the app, what it does, and using it in Wisconsin specifically.
Yeah. So for Wisconsin, I've shared this with many people. This is a big deal. Like, I moved to Wisconsin 10 years ago. They do not have the nice setup like the Minnesota DNR has in terms of the lake finder and finding detailed information about lakes. That's essentially non-existent. You can go to the Wisconsin DNR website, find little bits and pieces. In general, things are just classified as walleyes are present in this lake, or they're here, or they're abundant. That doesn't tell you much. So with Onyx, we're basically finally able to get kind of that same stuff that Minnesota has always had access to. So it's a big deal. I mean, I wish I had this 10 years ago, but
yeah,
I'm thankful it's here now. I mean,
right.
It's going to help me find some new stuff. Of course, I feel like I've tried, every lake within an hour and a half of Eau Claire already, but
right.
It's still going to be huge for finding new stuff, confirming some of the stuff I maybe thought about somewhere that I did try and it didn't pan out. Maybe it's going to make me go back there again. Just having that species data, knowing, this is the size range, these are the types that are there. That's going to be huge here.
I think it's cool because in Minnesota, I've used it just locally here to, like you said, confirm or deny suspicions about fish in certain areas. And the one thing I'm guilty of, and in Onyx Fish, I think is training me out of, is having my suppositions about a body of water and saying, that's good for bluegills. I've heard it's good for bluegills. I know people that have caught bluegills there. I will go there to catch bluegills. And then I look at the survey and I'm like, well, that actually looks like a hell of a summer bass lake. And there's not many crappies in it, but they're all huge.
Yep.
And I'd be like, I would have never even considered trying to fish for those species without kind of that tip off.
That's 100%.
So
I've seen that here
learn
too.
A lot there, right? Like you
definitely do.
Yeah. Tell me about, have you used any of the other filters in there where you can like filter for trophy lakes or keeper lakes?
Yes, I certainly have.
Don't tell anybody.
I'm not divulging in too much information there, but I found some lakes that either I had suspicions about in the past and I've kind of confirmed it finally, or I got some new ones I'm planning to try this winter.
And keeper potential, my introduction to Wisconsin and eating fish was like this gluttonous act. We would go up and we would catch as many gills or crappies as we could. Yep. We'd clean a lot and we would drink beer and eat fish. And there's no such thing as a side dish. And we just caught and ate fish. And then when you got sick of eating fish, you finished off the rest of the fish.
Yep.
That's a Wisconsin fish fry for you. But I make fun of it a little bit. But do you catch and catch and clean fish too? Do you eat fish these days?
I do. It's not a lot. I mean, I'll keep 5 fish here, 5 fish there. That's kind of what I do. Maybe I get on a good walleye bite, I'll keep my 3 walleyes.
Yeah.
But really, I don't keep that much. I'd say it kind of, there's people that don't fish a lot. It kind of irks them. They're like, "Oh, why are you going fishing if you're not going to keep fishing?" I'm like, I just like to fish.
Yeah.
Like,
right. But you do, but you're like me, and then we do like to eat fish. But what's your favorite way to make them? Do you do the walleye tacos gig like so many of us do?
We do that. Lately for walleyes, it's been grill. Like it's kind of like that trout recipe I mentioned, just a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of seasoning, and that goes over well in my house. The kids eat it. My wife eats it. It's good stuff.
Jeremy Smith, I was chatting with him. You know who Jeremy is. Yep. He's a guy. He's with Linder Media. He's a legend in the industry as far as I'm concerned. He fishes more with Al Linder than anybody else that I know of, except for maybe his brother Ron. And Jeremy was telling me about a walleye recipe he uses that's very similar. And I think he's got some sort of a griddle either on his grill or he uses a Blackstone type piece of equipment to do this. But he takes onions and he gets a mandolin and he slices them like ridiculously thin with the mandolin, like as thin as you can slice it with those things.
Yep.
And he puts down a bed of that and then coats it with a little bit of oil and butter, seasons the walleye fillets as they are and puts them on top of that bed of onions. And so it steams the fish. They still get a little bit of color on them and tons of flavor from the onions. And then you've got like these caramelized onions that kind of go with the walleyes. And it's like, yeah, I have yet to try it, but it sounds ridiculously good.
It does. That's something that I'm going to have to try for sure.
Fish and onions. That's a very Midwest thing. Jeez.
It is. Yeah.
With fish and onions.
Uh-huh.
May need to add some potatoes to that, right?
Yeah.
Logan Long, shout out to the best auger brand in the market. Cheers, fellas. Thanks, Logan. We ran into Logan at the St. Paul show, and it's interesting because I think he was working with Eskimo, and Eskimo's got that E40 out. Tell me a little bit. Have you run the E40 too?
Yes. Yep. I have that one as well. I ran that last year. It's kind of like the budget-friendly Alpha. That's the way I sell it. Like, if it's not as fast, it definitely cuts smooth, just like you'd expect a pistol bit or an Alpha 2. But it's a fantastic auger as well. I mean, if you want kind of the best of the best Alpha, that's the way to go.
Yeah.
But maybe you only fish a handful of times a year. Maybe you're not drilling that many holes. Like that E40, that's a great option there.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've only drilled with it a handful of times. I don't own one. And my experience was that it's still a market upgrade from just about anything else on the market, right? It's got the poly flighting.
Yep.
It's got the same blade or a similar blade system to the Alpha. Is that true?
Very similar. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar.
Very similar. So it cuts pretty quickly, not as quickly as the Alpha, like you said. It's got the compact handle design, and it's got those steel edges too, so it's ruggedized, which I like, because if you've ever leaned an auger up against something like you shouldn't, Murphy's Law is that it'll tip over, right?
100%. Yes.
And back when some of the electric auger companies were coming out on the market, a lot of the plastic handled ones, man, you'd crush those handles, they'd drop it, or you put it in the back of a truck, and it just wasn't rugged.
No, it really wasn't. It's the way that these newer ones are designed is far superior to the initial designs.
Anthony Kleinwatcher rings in with an awesome comment about cooking fish. I guess maybe we're too close to dinner. Maybe some folks haven't eaten yet. And so he said, frying pan with a little butter, lemon juice, lemon pepper, and roasted garlic seasoning. Might need a follow-up, Anthony, if you've got a brand for the roasted garlic seasoning. This sounds intriguing.
It does.
I've made my own roasted garlic. I can't say I've ever seen roasted garlic seasoning. It must be something specialty that's badass, really cool, that I've never heard anything about. Anyways, it's kind of the rage, though, learning to cook fish without coating it in loads of breadcrumbs and dumping it in hot oil. There are other ways to cook fish, right?
Yeah, I've gotten to the point where I don't even want to eat fried fish. Like, I've eaten way too much of it in my life. I want something different. So I'm always looking for some new way to cook.
Something new and different. I had a recipe that was brought to my attention when I was at the last Aglow meeting. Association of Great Lakes Outdoor Writers. We were up in Bemidji. Were you up at that one?
I wasn't able to get to that one.
So that one was up in Bemidji, and I talked to a guide out of Niagara Falls who spent a fair amount of time on Erie, because Erie's right next door to those guys over there. And we all know how big of fish are out on Erie, right? Like he had these big walleye cheeks that he had in photos. Like, they catch and kill a lot of big walleyes out there. And so they had this recipe that was just for the cheeks. I'm going to add this follow-up. Anthony said McCormick Grill Mates roasted garlic and herb. Okay. That's sweet. That's great. Thank you for that, Anthony. And Kleinwatcher, he's a hell of an angler too. So, like, I know he's tried this one out before a few times.
Yeah.
So anyway, this walleye cheek thing, they had walleye cheek soup, they called it. And he had to contact a guide buddy way back from the bowels of his phone, right? And he finally, at the end of the weekend, he and I assembled this recipe together with loose notes from different buddies and stuff. And it starts with a bag of Shore Lunch creamy potato soup.
Interesting.
And then you take the walleye, you cut it into chunks, make sure it's clean. I mean, really clean looking, beautiful walleye fillets, cut it in chunks. And then you treat it with a little bit of Old Bay. Okay. So you put Old Bay on the walleye, let that kind of marinate. and then literally you're kind of cooking the creamy potato soup and dumping the walleye into this. And I thought, wow, that was a lot of work that we did just to find out all you do is cook the soup in the bag and dump this in. But I tell you what, it's not that gourmet. It's really simple. But it's a great way to use up walleye in a way that I had not before. Walleye soup, right?
Yep. So
Creamy
speaking of recipes, you just reminded me of one. Justin Sofa, Sofa.
Yeah.
He gave me this recipe for Parmesan panko fish.
Oh.
It's baked. I don't have the recipe in front of me, but very simple. If I remember right, some olive oil, lemon juice, panko breadcrumbs, and Parmesan, and it's baked in the oven. I was one of my favorite recipes I've ever had.
Interesting. Sounds good.
Yep.
How do you get it to stick so well? Probably an egg wash of some kind, or what do you do?
Yep, it was an egg wash. Yep.
All right. Yeah, probably dip in flour, egg wash, and then panko and Parmesan. Interesting. So James Bystrom just rung in and asked if there are any tips for the Ion. So you take this thing out of the box. What do you do, Blake?
Charge the battery. First thing you got to do, charge it up. Make sure it's fully charged before you take it out for the first time.
Right.
It's, yeah.
And then you hit the ice with the thing, and it's really just push the button and go, right?
Yeah, there's nothing else. Yeah. I mean, it's push and play.
Yeah. And, one thing I've noticed that we didn't talk much about is the lights on the underside of this thing are nice in a fish house. A lot of times if you're in a portable and you decide to flip the lid first, I tend to drill my holes and then flip it.
Yep.
But let's say you set up a pop-up, it's windy, and you go in there to drill the holes, none of the windows are open. That light actually is really nice for illuminating the ice and seeing things. So you're not like, drilling over the edge of your flap or cutting up your fish house or anything like that.
Yes.
What sizes do you run? Are you an 8-inch only guy, or do you grab a 10 for other stuff?
For the stuff that I fish, I have not had a reason to use a 10. If I did more lake trout, more pike, stuff like that, I definitely would invest in a 10.
Yeah.
But for me, it's an 8. Like, I'm over here wishing they had the 6-inch Ion because for panfish, it'd be killer.
It'd be scary how fast that thing would drill too.
It would be. You could probably drill like 10,000 inches of ice with that.
Yeah, and when the ice gets really thick, that's a really neat deal, right? Like, it'd be sweet to just zip it open and not even have to think about it, right?
Yeah.
So tell me this. I run 10-inch augers quite a bit in the wheelhouse, but you've got young kids. I had young kids. Yeah. That still scares the daylights out of me. Does it you?
Oh, for sure. Even with an 8-inch, man, a little kid's foot can fit down that 8-inch hole. Like you got to be cautious.
They've got like a homing device on their feet. It's like made to find open ice holes, right?
Yeah. It seems like it doesn't get easier for a long time either. I mean, I have buddies' kids who are a fair amount older, and somebody's always getting a foot in a hole.
Yeah, my boys can still do it. It's wild.
Yeah.
So tell me this. I know you've been on the cutting edge of fishing for quite a while. Forward-facing sonar is not something you've been scared of by any means. You've really embraced the technology.
Yep.
I know just from speaking to you, it's a part of your strategy. It's not the only part of your strategy, but tell me where you're at with forward-facing sonar now. Break it open. Break the topic open. Spend a little time. Tell me what you use, why, how. Give me all of the details. I'm interested.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've had forward-facing sonar for, 5 years now. It's 4 or 5 years now. It's a tool in the toolbox. It's no different to me than mapping is or side imaging. It's a tool in the toolbox. In terms of ice, for me, it's just a piece of kind of the overall puzzle. I'm still using a flasher every time I go out. Always have a flasher with me. I'm using that forward-facing sonar to find the fish, but when it comes to actually fishing, I'm taking a flasher 100% of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me, are you using a flasher in concert with your forward-facing sonar, like hanging out with it and using it to get closer and see panfish in tighter detail?
Yes, especially for panfish. I mean, maybe you can get away with it with some of the larger species, but having that target separation that you get, that accuracy and detail that you get, the absolute zero lag that you get with an actual flasher, it can really pay dividends, especially with panfish.
Right.
Bluegills. I mean, think about bluegills, how Big bluegills are such a pain in the butt.
They're such a pain. That's the best way to say it too, because I love the things and I love to hate them when it's like that.
Oh, for sure. And those are those bites where like having an actual flasher can make a huge difference.
Yeah, I think people forget that. Like you can bring in fish or see fish coming in with forward facing.
Yeah.
And there's like a cloud of them, but that doesn't do you any good when they get within a foot of your bait because you lose the ability to see anything down there, right?
You do. And forward facing technology it's amazing stuff, but it's not the only thing.
Right.
When it comes to ice, like you need to have all the tools there in your toolbox.
I sound like the oldest of old guys when I'm like, don't throw your flasher away just yet.
No.
As people are trying to sell it to fund their forward-facing sonar, and I feel strongly about this, especially if you're a panfish angler.
Yes,
you're going to be missing that thing if you get rid of it.
You do, and like you think about like some of these basin crappie bites, like you can find those fish with that live scope or whatever you use, but then you're lugging that darn thing around too. Like there's times where you still need to drill all those same holes you drilled before you had it, but do you really want to be lugging around 15, 20 pounds with you when you could just take something that's a few pounds?
Exactly. 100%. So forward-facing sonar, you use it for panfish, for walleyes. I'm sure you use it for walleyes when you head up fishing the big waters and probably Minnesota.
Yep.
Any crazy stories? Anything you've seen on there that's really wild? Sturgeon? Anything? I'm sure you've seen muskies galore, right?
Yeah, muskie, sturgeon. Loons, like all kinds of cool stuff. To me, it's really cool the stuff that I've learned, like finding fish in some of these weird spots that I would have never fished if I didn't have that technology.
Yeah,
they were just drive over spots. Like I'm driving over that to get to the weed line I want to fish. But like especially panfish in some of these little lakes, like they're like on the nothingness. They're not out in the basin. They're not out on the weed line. Like they're just on the nothingness, like that kind of gap in between. And you wouldn't find those fish unless you either accidentally stumbled on them or you had that technology.
There was a period in time where contour lines and studying contours, learning to read contours was a big part of fishing education. I think you and I kind of went through that time. And then as HD surveys or HD contours became popular with the Lake Master chips and whatnot, and we began to key in on structural elements.
Yeah.
But I think forgot over time, at least in those days, I didn't pay much attention to it. All of the mud to sand transitions, gravel to sand, gravel to mud and rock transitions, where it'd be away from the structure. Yeah. It's nowhere near a contour line. And without forward-facing sonar, I think a lot of us would still be stuck to those contour lines, right?
Oh, for sure. And it's hard not to be. Like, it's when you see this obvious feature on a map, it's hard not to go right there. Like, oh, obviously there's going to be whatever species in this spot, but
right.
A lot of times it's not. Yeah.
It's different. Let's focus on that, right?
Yeah.
So do you have to head anywhere this weekend? I know there's the Oshkosh show going on right now, right?
I don't. The Oshkosh show starts tomorrow.
Oh, it does. Okay.
Yeah,
so folks are gathering. I spoke to a number of people that were traveling on their way out there. I know there's ice shows in Michigan. There's an ice show in Duluth this weekend.
Yep.
And we also have various in-store events, like I was talking about the Cabela's Rogers one. So you went through the ice show and have been to a number of ice shows this year. What is the newest, latest, greatest thing that you can't live without? Is there anything new under the sun at all? Did you walk the show and find something that's like, I just have to have this?
I walked the show and I walked it probably twice. Okay. And I don't think there was a single thing that I'm like, I need that. This has been the first year in a really long time. And I think we had the last 2 years to kind of thank for that. Mm-hmm. I think, 2 bad ice seasons kind of halted innovation a little bit. It's hard for these companies to want to create something new when they don't know how this ice season is going to be.
Right.
So
I did the same thing you did. And unfortunately, I've been in that camp for a couple of years now where I just rack my brain and I've got no clue and it all looks like something that I need. But then I think hard and it's like, well, I probably already have something just like that. If not,
that's the problem. Yep. That's exactly it.
And then I tend to do this too, where I forgot that I really needed something and I could have got it for like pennies on the dollar at the St. Paul Ice Show because they were fire sailing everything this year.
Yep.
And reel tape is what I went home without.
Yep. I've done that plenty of times.
So tell me this, what kind of reel tape do you use? Because I probably should go out and buy some.
So I have been using the self-fusing silicone tape for the last 5 years or so, and I really, really like that. It's it's not marketed as real tape.
Yeah.
It's it's designed for plumbing. That's what it's for.
Right.
I know there's a few brands out there that actually have their own version of it for ice now.
Yeah.
But the great part, it doesn't kill cork. I mean, all of my ice rods are cork handles.
Mm-hmm.
And electrical tape, you can do the thing where you wind it backwards and then wrap it around that way, and then that works.
Yep.
But that self-fusing silicone tape, you just strap it on there. There's no issues. It only sticks to itself. So that's a big deal. It's not going to stick to anything else.
That is a big deal. So you don't even need to run masking tape underneath to be able to strap that baby on tight.
Nope, not at all. And it's stretchy, especially when you're first wrapping it. You just really got to pull it tight, and then after it's sat for a day, it still feels gummy to the touch like tape would, but it's not stretchy anymore.
Sure, it's not going to come loose on you then.
No, not at all.
Excellent. Yeah, I have some of that on order, and I'm like this where I'll probably buy 2 other kinds at Cabela's, or I just I'm always looking for a better mousetrap when it comes to things like that. And I know I need to pick up some finicky foolers too. I've got a handful. I almost feel like they're such a cool part of what I've done in the past few years that I don't want to be without them. Do you use that product?
I do. Yep. I've used a lot of the other brands. I've used a lot of tip ups. I mean, being in Wisconsin, it's all about tip ups here, but I don't even own a single regular tip up anymore. I've switched completely to using, I have, different rods if I'm fishing for pike or walleye or panfish, and then I use the finicky foolers.
And why is that? Why no more tip ups?
I like fighting them on a rod. It's way more fun to me. The finicky fooler, it's super compact. That's why I like that better than some of the other stuff out there too.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing how much nicer it is to fight, especially a big fish on a rod. I mean, man, I just remember Lake of the Woods and trying to pull in pike hand over hand, and what a god awful chore that was. It's scary, right? I mean, they're huge.
Yeah, and you just don't have the control like you do when you have a rod.
Right.
It's not the same.
Lake of the Woods, you gonna head there this year? You're gonna chase after walleyes, pike, anything up there?
I don't know if I'm going to. I know I'm going to head over to Minnesota. There's a group of 6 of us that we've been taking a trip somewhere different every year. This is I think it's our 12th or 13th year now. So we're going to Grand Rapids area. Going to hit the Winnie, a lot of the small panfish lakes in the area, some little smaller walleye lakes.
Cool.
So
fun.
Yeah. That's my main Minnesota trip for the year. I'm sure I'll do something else. Thinking about an ottertail trip. That's a fun area. I love that.
Are you guys all from Wisconsin then, or all from Minnesota, or a mix?
No, everybody lives in Minnesota except for me. So it's guys I went to high school with and college with. So it's
so if I'm a mud duck when I go to Wisconsin and pick on your fisheries, what are you as a Wisconsinite going to Minnesota? But you're just going back home.
I'm just going back home, but I get called the cheesehead. I'm sure there's some names I can't say. There's plenty of those. Yeah,
select ones of those.
Yeah.
James says another question. I normally run with 6 rods, 3 for walleye, 3 for panfish. What do you guys run with most days? Good question, Blake. Take it away.
Depends on the day for me. I mean, if I'm going somewhere strictly for panfish, I will probably have 6-ish panfish rods with me. I like to have a rod for everything. I don't want to have to be retying on the ice. Obviously, there's times you break off, you want to switch, but I'd rather have, one for a jig and a plastic. I'd have one for a hard bait, one for a glide bait. I want to have all that stuff rigged up right away. Same thing applies for walleyes, always 4 to 6. I got a spoon rod. I have, my Z Viber rod. I have one for like jig and wraps and Z darters, the glide bait style thing. I don't want to be retying unless I have to.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I love having multiple rods rigged at the hole. If I can afford to dance around, and one under my armpit, some in my teeth, one on the carrying case of the shuttle that I've got, with panfish and big bluegills especially, it's really nice to be able to keep them in the cone and then drop on them repeatedly. Something didn't work. Well, pull it up slow to get it above their head, then get it out of there, and then drop something quick in return to see if they're, if you take their temperature with that bait instead, right?
Oh, for sure. At any given time, I always have 2 rods in the shuttle or on the ice next to me, and then the one that I'm fishing with. It's just, I want to be able to drop something different down.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the key is for those rods, James, I would say you got to pair up the rod to the presentation you're fishing. Blake, maybe touch on that a little bit for them.
Yeah, I mean, they're rods in this day and age. It's not like the ice rods of the past where it was like kind of a one size fits all. Things are a lot more like the open water side these days, where you have, specific rods that do specific tasks. I mean, when I think about the St. Croix that I have the Pan Dancer, which is strictly for me is like a 3 to 4 millimeter tungsten rod. Nothing else gets used on that rod. I have the Perch Seeker, which for me is like a small hard bait rod, and that's all that gets used on that.
Yeah,
that's they have their tasks.
Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the key things, and you learn it by fishing with enough rods over enough time, but pairing up the right presentation is so key because, especially for things like crappies and bluegills, when they get finicky, you need control.
You do.
If you have a bait that's too heavy for the rod you're fishing and it's sloppy, about the only hit you're going to detect is an up hit if you get lucky and you're holding the rod still when that happens.
Right.
But the other opposite problems, if you have a rod that's too stiff, maybe you're using a walleye rod in a panfish setting, it can be hard at times unless you're a line watcher and you got a finger on the blank to detect that strike. And then a lot of times you set the hook, and if it goes to too much backbone, it's hard to play that fish out, right?
It certainly is.
Yeah, I think rod selection and trying to make it work for people comes down to a little bit of experience, but it also comes down to taking an honest look at your tackle box, correct?
Oh, it does, yeah. Like you want to have stuff that fits the way you fish and the stuff you fish with.
Yeah, tell me about line. What do you use for line these days?
I use almost exclusively fluorocarbon.
Yeah.
I know that's kind of abnormal for the ice industry. There's a lot of people that like mono, and I have rods that I have mono on, but for the most part, I'm using 2 to 3 pound mono for panfish, and then 4 to 5 usually for walleyes.
Right. The cool thing about fluoro these days is it's better than the fluoro of old. I remember the old Berkeley Vanish when it first came out. It's much better now. I don't mean to tear up on that product.
Yep.
When it was first released, I remember biting off a chunk and looking at the end, and it looked like I cut a yellow poly rope with a butter knife. It was brutal. It was just like, it looked like a back of a porcupine or something. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I remember the first time, I don't know, it's probably 10, 15 years ago when I tried fluorocarbon for the first time on an ice rod. You get it all spooled up, go for the first time, and you fling that bail open and just, and I swore off of it for a while until I tried some of these higher end fluorocarbons, and that's where I'm at now. It really makes a difference. It's just like open water fishing. If you buy the higher quality product, in a lot of instances, it's going to make a difference.
Yeah, and for me, line is pretty important. I test it every year, and it's almost always I'm respooling every year. I can't think of any rod that I don't want to respool every year. It's usually cheap. And so are you a respooler every year? Can you get more than 1 year out of a spool line, depending on how much you use it?
Yes, it all depends on how much I use it. For the rods that don't get used a lot, usually I'll just strip off a couple of feet and try that. And if it's an issue after the first or second outing, then I'm going to respool.
Some line gets gritty. You know what I mean? Like you can feel it. And I don't know. It just doesn't handle well after that, right?
It doesn't. No, but I feel like with that higher quality fluorocarbon, I don't have those same issues. It's with the mono rods. Mono sits for a while. That's getting switched for sure.
Yep. It gets trashed pretty quick.
Yep.
Well, I tell you what, I'm just about out of questions. I am looking down at my notes here to see if there's anything else. How about you, Blake? Anything else you want to talk about based on either sponsors that you work for, different things we haven't talked about, things that are hot on your mind right now?
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, I'd like to hear, where's Joel Nelson fishing first?
Oh, God.
And when are you fishing?
Well, I have planned to fish this weekend. if I can get away not fishing weekends, I much rather prefer to fish a weeknight.
Yep.
Even if it is local. I'm in between the Twin Cities and Rochester, so I typically have to drive to fish unless I fish just a couple of small local options. So I don't know. I might head to Western Wisconsin for fear of being called a mud duck, but
you're welcome here anytime.
The ice, it looks like, is good in most places now to at least creep out with some confidence. After last year, I didn't know that I was ever gonna. I didn't know that I was gonna get out last year at all. After some of the experiences I had.
Yeah, it was a tough year. Like I took my 4-wheeler out one time. That's never happened.
Yeah,
literally one time. I walked the entire season. It just was how it was here.
I got creeped out on a couple places where it was good for like a week, and then I got out there the next week, and it was open water all around, and then it froze up again, and I just thought, is this trustable ice this year?
It was a scary year last year.
Yeah, well, hopefully this year it's going to be a lot better. I'm still going to spud bar my way out unless I literally see people flying past me on wheelers. I'm still going to grab that spud bar.
I know it's hard not to. You feel like you have to this time of year. It's kind of that rite of passage. Like even if I see a guy out there doing something different, I'm going to drill a few holes along the way, see what I'm looking at. I'd rather be safe than sorry.
2 years ago, we had a lot of cold, but we had a fair amount of snow too. And I saw a lot of holes that were opening up in the middle of some lakes. And so you see enough of that crap and you just don't ever trust it fully like you did maybe before, right?
No, it's all it takes is that one time or that one situation to see something weird to kind of change your opinion on it.
Yeah. James asks, last question, inline reel or open face? So spinning reel or inline? Blake, what's your pick?
I use a little of both. In terms of inlines, I guess you could call them, I just use schoolie reels for the most part. I do have a couple of inlines that I use in deeper water situations, but anytime I'm under probably 15, 20 feet of water, I'm using a schoolie reel instead. They're dirt cheap.
Yep.
I mean, they're extremely reliable for a $5 reel. And it just gives you way more control. That setup is, a fraction of the weight compared to an inline reel. Everything else, I'm using a spinning. So,
what do you put the schoolies on? You put them on those Croy Custom ice rods, just like you would any other reel?
Yep, usually the shorter one. So my favorite schoolie setup it's a 24-inch ultralight Scandic. So that's one of the cheaper lines in the St. Croix. Mm-hmm. And it just pairs really, really well with a schoolie reel.
Interesting. I like that. I like the look of that Scandic rod too. That's a sweet little setup, sharp looking unit.
Very, very nice for the price.
Very cool. All right. Well, we're right at about the 1 hour mark. Really appreciate you joining with me, Blake. Let's hit the ice this winter. I hope that we get past this ice season and maybe into Christmas. I can sneak away and we'll go beat up on some of your favorite spots. And then
sounds great to me.
Tell everybody no, I won't. Not that part. Anything but that part.
I'm not taking you to the best spots. So you got to earn those. Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You got to earn your way to the top. I agree.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on Ion Live. It's been Blake Tollefson and myself. Everybody have a great night. Stay safe out on the ice and get some fish.